New reporting is giving us an inside look at Democrats' strategy when it comes to impeaching this president. Our own Heidi Prisbilla reports that according to multiple people familiar with deliberations, and this is important, House Democrats are, quote, zeroing in on a framework for their impeachment case that will center on a simple abuse of power narrative involving the president's actions regarding Ukraine. The report goes on to say, and we quote, still under debate is whether leaders will roll potential obstruction charges related to Mueller's investigation into the same article that deals with Ukraine. The one person we wanted to talk to about this tonight, turns out, is available. Former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance, who spent 25 years as a federal prosecutor. Joyce, talk about this because it seems directly informed by the density and complexity of the Mueller report. No less a document, but it just wasn't digested and understood by the American public. It's a sacrilege, but I've been saying that had it been a Twitter thread of 20 items, people may have come away with a greater understanding of it than that. And also talk about the temptation, as they say about legislation, when they start adding amendments, it becomes a Christmas tree, the temptation to throw other stuff in the hopper.
So I think one of the issues that we need to think about now is strategy and pragmatic engagement when you're drafting a charging document like articles of impeachment. The American public has a lot of emotional engagement with the topic of the president's behavior on both sides of the equation, right? But from a prosecutor's point of view, and that's what'll happen when Congress drafts articles of impeachment, the House will be acting as prosecutors. You need to draft an effective document, and that often means crafting a simple narrative, a narrative that people can readily understand and seize onto. Every prosecutor knows horror stories about a public corruption case or a white-collar case that was over-indicted, that became too complex for the jury to understand. So the best path forward here will be one that in many ways, as you point out, Brian, avoids the pitfalls of the Mueller report, avoids that level of complexity that became overwhelming and confusing, and adopts an almost Trump-like strategy of stringing together some readily understood bumper stickers.
What do you say, though, to members of the caucus who say, no, look over here, these things he did here are much worse. This charge over here that we're leaving on the side is much worse. You try to tell them that it's best for the whole to go under this one banner?
So this will be, I think, a fiercely negotiated process. The abuse of trust narrative is very easy to understand. We don't trade our national security for political favors for a president. And with that as the centerpiece, it'll be possible to add some additional pieces. I think likely contempt of Congress or obstruction of Congress plays in, perhaps an emoluments clause charge. But the challenge will be to remember that the Democrats, if they're playing for keeps, have to pick up votes in the Senate from Republicans. And even though we hear this statistic now that more Americans than not favor impeachment, that statistic doesn't hold true in every state. So in states like Alabama, for instance, where Trump is still very popular, there will have to be a narrative that's compelling enough for people who aren't predisposed to believe it to catch on, because ultimately senators from those states, Republican senators, will not change their votes in favor of impeachment unless they feel comfortable that the people that they represent are on board.
Joyce,
that's what makes simplicity and clarity critical.
I want to spend a word here talking about Rudy Giuliani. This is the reporting from the New York Times. The Justice Department distanced itself on Sunday from Rudolph Giuliani, President Trump's personal lawyer, declaring that department officials would not have met with Mr. Giuliani to discuss one of his clients had they known that federal prosecutors in New York were investigating two of his associates. A lot more pictures have become public thanks to the Wall Street Journal reporting showing the closeness between Rudy and these guys and the whole circle of them. What does this say about potential trouble for Rudy Giuliani?
This situation really boggles the mind because typically DOJ has a strict policy of not commenting on ongoing investigations. DOJ doesn't acknowledge that investigations are underway except in very rare cases, primarily involving civil rights. So doing this is tacitly acknowledging that Giuliani is under investigation. I appreciate that there's been reporting and coverage on that, but DOJ typically will follow this policy of not weighing in to preserve the rights of those who are under investigation. The entire situation, though, speaks of a lot of dysfunction. This notion that we have the lawyer for the President of the United States who's in the halls of DOJ trying to negotiate cases for his clients, while the folks perhaps that he's negotiating with have this understanding of his relationship with the President of the United States, is really unfortunate. It really brings a bad light to bear on DOJ's integrity.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.